And you know what? If someone gets upset with me because of this, I can live with it. You should have a calendar. Like, if you are an adult and you plan to take care of your life well, steward your time well, care for others well, you should keep a calendar. This is not a legalistic thing. This is just like wisdom for living.
Yeah, it's wisdom.
Yeah, it's wisdom for living. You got to keep a calendar. And I say that because I still encounter people who don't have one.
We should rename this podcast to like Three Old Men.
Three Old Men.
We just get like rocking
rants.
chairs. Yeah.
All of life rant.
Yeah.
All right. Welcome back to the All of Life podcast, where we talk about faith, theology, culture, all the things. We talk about it through the lens of our faith and through the lens of Jesus' lordship over everything. And so this is like episode 2 of a new season. I got John, I got Jim with me. So glad to be here once again, and we're excited for another conversation today. And as we got started with our last one, we're going to keep the same rhythm. We got started last time with just talking about things that are at the top of our minds. And so let's start like that again. What do you guys have going on at the top of your mind? What is the quote, the Instagram reel, the book, whatever it may be? What's at the top of your mind right now?
Top of the mind. The top of the mind for me is the weather outside.
The weather outside is...
It's amazing.
Oh.
Spent the weekend outside.
Yeah.
And just excited about that.
Yeah.
Quote-wise, this will probably be the place where I drop Eugene Peterson quotes
There we go.
on everybody.
Are you getting paid by like the Eugene Peterson Foundation or something? like
IDP
that?
maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
I got a quote around something that's repeated throughout Scripture is that the steadfast love of God endures forever, and just the perseverance of God. Eugene Peterson says this: the central reality for Christians is the personal, unalterable, persevering commitment God makes to us. Perseverance is not the result of our determination. It is the result of God's faithfulness. We survive in the way of faith, not because we have extraordinary stamina, but because God is righteous and because he sticks with us.
Amen. Amen.
Why does that stand out to you?
Yeah, I think it's the good news for us is that what actually perseveres us is the very faithfulness of God. And that it's not our stamina, it's not by how much we can muster up, but it's actually the fact that God has committed to us and he's faithful.
That's good.
I think that's a good reminder because, we are very influenced by a grind culture, right? That impacts us in a million different ways and even kind of leaks into our faith too. I have to grind for God's love.
Yeah.
Right? But it's God who's doing the work. It's God's stamina. All right, it's great. Love it, man. Eugene Peterson's, like I said, now this episode is official because he has made it into this episode. So thank you, John, for that.
What do you got?
What do I got? Man, I was thinking about this. I could have pulled up more John Pulsford quotes, but I'm going to switch it up today. I got his quotes for days. I could probably just do episodes and episodes on his quotes. But anyway, today we're going to do what I read, I don't know, the last couple of weeks. I've been reading this book called Spiritual Leadership by J. Oswald Sanders. And one of the chapters, he names some of the qualities that are necessary for good leadership.
Yeah.
And so what I was thinking is, I'm not going to name all of them because I'll leave something for purchasing the book. But I think I'll name the first, or the ones that stood out to me. The first one stood out to me is like, a leader must do the little things well. And I think that's so powerful, man. I think so often when it comes to leadership, we want to take leaps to the things that we ultimately want to be doing, but missing how doing the small things well actually form us for the greater thing that we may go on to do.
Yeah. What are some of those little things that come to mind?
I think like showing up on time, responding to people timely, making sure you're prepared for the things that you're doing, doing them well, not just to like get them done, but to do them in excellence. Right? And so I think there's just small things like that. Asking good questions, showing up ready to learn.
Yeah.
I can go on and on.
Yeah.
So I think that's one. Another one that he named is having intensity. And I really like that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think we can often look at passion as something childish. Passion is not childish.
Yeah.
Especially for these different things that God has called you to do. It's good.
Yeah.
Like, when you are enthused about something, the
Yeah.
people who are following you will be enthused about it too.
Yeah. I'm wondering if he's tying it to the scripture of don't grow weary in doing good.
And doing good. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that one, and the last one I'll name is exploiting momentum.
Exploiting momentum.
Yeah. Like, good leaders are able to recognize where the momentum is and then going, how is this momentum harnessed?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whatever the end is. So
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. What's on the top of the mind for me is something that we've coined that we talk a lot about, the October wall. And I see it starting to happen. The October wall is this season in the life of Arizonans, Tempeans, that right around the end of September, extending through the beginning of November, all through October, there's this season where it seems like people collectively hit the wall. And it comes from having a ton of momentum and excitement in August and September when you get back from vacations and everything in Arizona starts. Church stuff starts, schools start, youth
Facebook events.
leagues.
I even see more Facebook events.
There's more conferences,
Conferences.
Outdoor
National Bow
outings.
Day. National Barbecue Day.
Yeah.
All of it. The state fair. All of it comes
It's
at
everything.
one time.
Literally everything kicks off.
It all hits in the
man.
fall.
Yeah.
But then by October-ish, people realize they're not surfing on the adrenaline anymore, and they realize how much they've committed to, and they're feeling exhausted. And then right about that time, they'll go on some trip or vacation, whether it's like a fall break or fall conference for a student at ASU. And then they'll find themselves wiped out, kind of grumpy, and there's like a collective exhaustion that happens. And then the symptoms of that there are a few of them. One is I see such a spike in conflict during this time. Friendships end, people break up with their boyfriend and girlfriend. This is also where marital stuff will blow up. Ton of conflict happens in the October wall. Also, what you see is people trying to deal with their exhaustion by cutting back on things and cutting things out of their life.
Yeah.
Maybe that's somewhat necessary. Maybe they shouldn't have committed in the first place to so many things. But if you're in any kind of leadership or a part of any community, you'll start to see a drop-off of people. And it just gets this sense of depletion and discouragement that can set in. And so when you don't recognize that the October wall is coming, it can hit pretty hard. And you just find people doing the, like, what even is my life? Why am I trying so hard to try to do something and it doesn't even work? And you're not looking at the broader environmental factors. So
let me ask you this. How do you walk through it well?
How do you walk through it well?
How do you walk the October wall?
How do you get through the wall? How do you get over the wall?
How do you get around the wall, over it, Kool-Aid man through the wall, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the big things is don't try to go around hard things, go through hard things. Expect hard things. And this is one of those times when you expect hard things, and there's a certain steadfastness that James talks about that is cultivated through going through trials. So a lot of times you want to hit the eject button versus the, like, press into Jesus button. Two is I think you anticipate the October wall by going into October not being the exhausted one. Cutting out good time for solitude.
Right.
Not necessarily vacation. That's going to happen on these little trips, but that doesn't often equate to solitude.
Sure.
There's that Blaise Pascal quote where he says, like, all of humanity's problems, he's exaggerating, come from the inability of man to sit alone in the room, quietly in a room. And I think that if you have good solitude and getting away and getting time with God, and you are coming into October refreshed, you will show up as the person who can be like a healing balm to people who are struggling versus being another one of the people who are exhausted and worn out. And then I think it's just like knowing that it's a season and that this isn't the new reality of life.
Yeah.
It's like when you have kids and, they're teething. If all of life existed like them when they're teething, it would be pretty terrible.
Sure.
But as a parent, these teeth are going to pop out.
Yeah.
And you're going to be all right.
And they'll lose them one day.
Then they'll lose them one day. And I think having that same mindset in the October wall.
You know what it makes me think about? So, okay, we go through the existential crisis here in Arizona. Because it's so hot and we wonder why we live here and all of that. But it's kind of like when a new season starts, and I'm equating this to a sports team because that's what I know. It's like if a team goes on a 10 to 15 game winning streak, and you're like, oh man, this is great. But then, the season continues and you start to face challenges and maybe you lose 5 out of 7 or something like that. And you start to get discouraged and in despair. And there's a moment there to go, okay, like maybe that initial run was a little unrealistic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like maybe life always has these like swings of, like exuberance and joy and things to do. And then also pauses of like, I might be doing too much.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I mean, to be honest with you, I'm impressed that you would know what a 15-game winning streak is like as a Jets fan.
Well, I'm also a Yankees fan, and as a Cardinals fan, I don't think you've
Yankees
had a 15-minute
as a what fan? A Cardinals
as an Arizona sports fan, I don't know if you've had a 15-minute run.
That's fair. That's fair.
The D-backs, but
Oh man. Anyway, that was good. You know what? You can make fun of my Jets. It's a new year. Aaron Rodgers. We're 2-1 at the recording of this. Wait, 1-1 at the recording of this, right? Yeah, that's right. Anyway, moving on. All right, we are in the King of Kings season. We've been telling you guys that. We've been announcing it. We've been talking about it. It's been a really exciting season as we have been aiming to serve and make our allegiance to Jesus be the thing that is at the top of our lives, right? It's at the center of our lives. That takes priority over every single thing. And so I'm even rocking the shirt this morning. King of Kings shirt.
keep selling out.
Yeah, selling out. These shirts are popular. And what we did in our last episode is we walked through the commitments, the King of Kings commitments, the things that we said as a church through this season when there are going to be a million things vying for our allegiance. These are the things that are going to ground us. And they're not things that we just made up from thin air or things that we are commanded to do in Scripture. And so we started there, and that was really fun to walk through that. And I think we should continue walking through the guide, which we're like all out. So shout out to you guys for grabbing those. And hopefully they're not stuck in your car somewhere, but you're actually like reading through them and doing the things on them. But we don't have a guide this morning, but we have it digitally. And we'll even drop that digital link in the show notes if you are looking to grab one or to look at it. But today we want to walk through the kingdom actions, and we want to start with relationships. I think this is fitting. We actually just did an All of Life forum in September, all about relationships, and man, you guys had 99 million questions.
Yeah, we got some good ones.
We got some really good ones. So here's our plan. Here's where we're going today. We are going to plan to talk through the kingdom actions, the relationship kingdom actions here, and then we're going to be ambitious. We're going to try and answer some of your questions.
Yep.
The ones that we didn't get to on the All of Life forum. And so, you guys ready?
Yep.
Let's do it.
Let's talk about it. All right. How should we do this? Should we just take them one by one?
Let's do one by one.
One by one. All right. So, in the relationships column of this guide, here's the subheading. It says, take steps. Our aim with this action of cultivating, caring for the relationships in our lives is to take steps to cultivate healthier, more Christ-like relationships that display the kingdom among your friends, family, and community. I need to increase my font size because I can't see anything here, man.
Vision test.
I know. All right. So the first one, I'll read it, and then we could do round robin style like we did last time. First one is a peacemaking step. Identify a relationship currently strained by conflict. Take a tangible step towards reconciliation, whether that's initiating a conversation, offering an apology, or simply expressing your desire to reconcile. Talk about it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people have a little list. For some, it's a long list of people where they've kind of had the mindset of, I'm just done with this person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The idea of like cutting someone out, shunning them, is very popular right now.
Yeah.
And I think what this is saying is, you don't have to like figure it all out.
Yeah.
Just take what's the next best step you need to take to move toward this person.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know, Jim, and you've talked about this a lot, like the different types of not for real peace, as much as I can remember it. And I think something that's really popular these days is peace faking.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think it's a really popular thing. I think no one wants to be known as the person who necessarily cuts someone out completely. I think it still happens. But there's a lot of relationships where there are things unsaid.
Yeah. And I think that people think they're doing some good
Right.
and preserving the relationship
Yeah.
by just ghosting the person
Yeah.
and kind of being acquaintances
Right.
versus addressing what needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And if done well, conflict can lead to like deeper connection and intimacy and bonds of friendship, rather than what I think most people are terrified of, is that this is going to put the death nail in the relationship.
Yeah. I think it's easy to get to that place with people, especially within the church, because it's like, well, I don't hate them.
Right.
So like I'm good, but you can kind of this subtly cutting them out of your life.
Yeah.
And because you don't explicitly hate them, you're good. But yet there can still be this subtle contempt you feel for someone.
Yes.
And I think that this is actually a really healthy, not only biblical, but this would be transformative in our lives if we actually did this with like, hey, what's the relationship? And you take one step towards.
And it's just interesting to me because I think we would say in other parts of our life, right, that acknowledgement is the first step towards health.
Yeah.
We would say that, and like when it comes to our physical health, we would say that even in things that we struggle with maybe personally, but when it comes to other people, it's like, and if there's an issue, it's like, don't acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And we think that's going to lead to health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask you guys a question. If someone's wondering, this was also one of the questions that popped up from the forum. How do you know the difference between a relationship that needs a step toward reconciliation and when you need to address something with someone, and when it's just like a little annoyance, or when, Scripture talks about, love covers a multitude of sins, and it's something that you can just get over and forgive? Like, how do you know which is which?
Great question.
It's a really good question.
Because you have some people who are just like running from conflict.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then some people who are like, the other day, you looked over my shoulder at someone else when I was talking to you, and I can't stop thinking about it. And you put one glass on the counter instead of in the dishwasher.
Man.
Yeah.
And it's just, everything's an issue.
Yeah. That one is hard. Here's something I would say.
Yeah.
And we can tease this out, right?
Yeah.
I think if you notice within your heart that you've been building a narrative, I think it's worth addressing at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like you've been stringing things together. It's not like, hey, this person did this single thing that annoyed me a bit and I can move on from it. But there's a narrative that's being strung together. Because if that's happening in your heart, then I think that relationship is impacted to a point where it's like, we got to really talk about this. Because if not, the narration will continue.
Yeah.
The only way to break that narration is bringing it to the forefront.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that regardless of which one it is, even if it's an annoyance, I think that that's still one of those things under this step. It's offering an apology. I think that's the examination of Psalm 139. Like, Lord, search my heart. Are there grievous ways in me? And maybe there's something that someone's doing, and that's just them. And yet it annoys the crap out of you, right? And maybe there's actually something in you that you still need as a part of walking this step out. You actually need to examine and own to say, maybe the problem's not with you, Warren, but the problem is with me. Sure. And maybe I can still take a step and name, hey, you know what? When you've been doing this, it really annoys me, but I realize like, hey, I want to confess that I have actually maybe kept you at a distance because there's these subtle annoyances that bother me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that there's the first step is actually get with God and prayerfully reflect on what the issue is. Because it might be that the step is that you need to repent and not even bring it up with another person.
Yeah, that's true.
I've had people, I had this one guy come to me a long time ago when I was a missionary in Turkey, and he was like, hey, I've been supporting you $50 a month, and I just really resent you every time I see that $50 go out of the account. And I just wonder, like, I'm working so hard at a job that I don't love, and you're off, like, doing something that feels like you're calling, and like I have all this bitterness towards you, and for me, I was like, man, that was probably between you and God that you go sort that out and repent of that and stop giving to me.
Yeah, exactly.
That was like a him and God issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think that's good. Yeah.
So I think that just get with God and really try to. People mostly put zero preparation into conflict, and they just come in.
And that's when things go bad.
Yeah. So,
all right, next one. Take it away, John.
Living examples. Read through each section in the Sermon on the Mount and text the friend who best exemplifies this section by the way they live their life. Write them a note expressing your gratitude.
Yeah. So maybe we should just name some parts of Sermon on the Mount and say who are some people that you know who exemplify these that you would send the text message to. So Warren's recent sermon.
Wait, I was going to do that one.
No, I'm going to ask the question.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So if the sermon was on doing things to be seen by God and not others, who do you see?
Dude, for me, it's Jason Raber.
Jason Raber.
I know this will probably make him uncomfortable even hearing this, and I think that even speaks to his heart. But I've seen him do a lot of things behind the scenes to come alongside people in need in a million different ways and really walk with them and never make one sound or note about it ever.
That's cool. Yeah. You pick a part of the...
It's to yours. Loving your enemies.
Loving your enemies.
Pursuing reconciliation.
Yeah. Marcus Doe, who's at Redemption Tucson. I forget the details of the story, but there were people who were involved in, like, his father's death.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that he eventually forgave and moved toward them in reconciliation.
It's incredible.
And what he's really focused on now is this whole ministry of reconciling estranged fathers with their sons.
Yep.
That can be some of the biggest enemies, is the father who left.
Absolutely.
And the work he's doing there is basically helping people to love their enemies.
Yeah.
Who's often their fathers and sons. Yeah.
Yep. That organization is We Reconcile.
Yeah.
So it's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Pick one for John.
I'll pick one for John. Yeah. I'll say.
Lust and divorce here.
Oh.
Yeah.
We're all doing each other's sermons.
No.
Hey, I got some good ones on that, actually, man.
No, I'm going to challenge you on it. I'm going to say. Removing the log from your eye.
Removing the log.
Yeah.
Yeah, a guy that I feel like really exemplifies that in our church, and he's in my RC, is Rich Riddell. Yeah, like he really, I feel like, embodies the humility of being able to own ways where he is wrong before pointing out something else in someone else. And I respect him a lot. And I would say, even exemplifies a lot of the Beatitudes. You know, just like a really good guy that really lives out the Christian life.
Dude, it's so interesting you say that, because this morning I was thanking God for Rich Riddell when I was praying, and have no idea why he popped into mind. But
and I talked to Rich Riddell last night. So Rich Riddell, I don't know.
Rich, this podcast is for you.
We should rename this action the Rich Riddell.
We're good at that. So, we're instructed to outdo, and we're commanded to outdo one another in showing honor. And Scripture, I think this really gives us an opportunity to do that.
Totally.
Really show honor to people.
And this is just very, like, everybody needs to be encouraged.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you do this, you could really be the wind in someone's sails.
Absolutely.
God could use you that day. And I just think, there's something really powerful of encouraging someone to say, hey, I see this in you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Jim, take us through the next one.
The next one would be Kingdom Lens.
Yep.
So gather your family or a group of friends and read through the Sermon on the Mount in one sitting. Ask the Spirit to show you how it applies to your relationships.
How long does it take to read through the Sermon on the Mount in one sitting, Jim? What would you say?
It would be like 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not very long.
Depending on if you're a slow reader or a fast reader.
Right.
Yeah.
Listen to audio Bible on 3x speed.
Yeah, man, we should have AC record this, man.
Yeah. So one thing that I think stands out here is a lot of times we are reading the text and trying to understand the text. Sometimes you understand the text and you need the text to read different parts of your life.
Yeah.
And so when you take your group of friends, your roommates, your family, and you just say, hey, let's take this through the Sermon on the Mount and let that be a lens through which we look at our relationship, and are there areas that we need to reevaluate,
How would, give us an example. How would somebody do that? Like, they've never done that before. What does it look like to let the Sermon on the Mount read a situation?
Yeah.
How might that look?
Okay, so if my family was reading through this and we were talking about doing the acts of righteousness to be seen by God and not others, what we might realize is that when we have people over to our house, there are subtle ways where we're trying to signal that we are like a family that has it together, or that here's the good that we do, and which isn't entirely wrong.
Right.
But if we might notice that we're doing it for the reward of the praise of others, and just say, hey, let's have the next person who comes over, we are not going to mention any of those things, but rather just take an interest in their life.
That's great.
So I think that's one example of it. Just read a section and say, what does this mean for our group?
It's great.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going. Next one is a listening session. So the action here is spending a whole conversation where you ask only questions or respond to questions. Consider an older family member and ask them to tell a story about your family history.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about that one?
So this was one of my favorite practices I've ever done. And it started with someone like when I was about 20 or 19, confronting me and basically saying in every conversation, I'm dominating the conversation. I never ask questions. I never take an interest in the other person. And so wanting to grow in this area, I would basically go through periods of time where I would only ask questions.
That's great.
And respond to questions. I started with like one conversation, and I've tried it at different intervals. The longest I tried to do was a week, and I only made it to like 3 or 4 days. But it's so fascinating.
Yeah.
What happens in that is that, one is you learn so much.
Yeah.
And two is that people feel so loved.
Yeah.
surprisingly, a common theme that pops up when I've done this is that people will say, they'll say something like, they're like, "Oh, you're so interesting. You have such good insights. You have very interesting things to say." And you realize I haven't said really anything. I've just asked questions. But most people feel a sense of like loneliness and a longing to be known, that they experience someone taking an interest in them as them being an interesting person.
Totally. No, I think about the people that I've enjoyed, like just speaking to, having conversation with, and they are often the ones who ask the most questions.
Yeah.
And they're not even saying much. And I think this is like, man, there's something to recognize of like other people. Like all of us have a well within us, right? It's like a deep well within us. And if you're like not asking the questions to draw some of that, it's like you're missing an opportunity for your own well to be refreshed.
Yeah.
And that's why I think you feel empty, or the conversation feels empty, is because you're not like giving someone the opportunity to pour something into you.
Yeah. There is something I've noticed when I go to coffee shops. And you just listen in on the way people are having conversations these days. More and more, I just sound like a old man just complaining about the old generation.
We're all getting older, man. For sure.
But
Wiser.
But you listen to a conversation at a coffee shop.
Yeah.
And it's often dueling monologues.
Yes.
And it's like someone is talking and they say something that vaguely reminds you of something, and then you do a monologue, then they do a monologue. But rarely are you hearing people take genuine, curious interest in one another and asking questions to really get to know and to draw someone out. Sometimes you can tell that there are questions that are being asked because it's like, here's the question that I would like to answer.
Exactly.
So I'll give it to you first. With the understanding of reciprocity. But the gift of good conversation and asking questions, you're really good at this. Like, what's wisdom for asking good questions?
Wisdom for asking good questions, I would say, is ask open-ended questions, which is, if you don't know what that is, it's just not a yes or no question. And then if you ask more exploratory questions that are not why questions. Why tends to put people on the defensive, but if you ask, hey, tell me about, or hey, what has led you to, or how did you fill in the blank, man, you literally are winding people up and just letting them go, because you're essentially saying, hey, help me understand this, or hey, how did you arrive at this belief or conclusion, or what were some of the things that led to that? And then you get people's story. And honestly, the majority of people are like just waiting and hoping that someone will ask them that.
Someone will ask them, especially like the older family members.
Oh, yeah.
That are named here.
That older family member one, I love that example because I'm even guilty of this. Until my grandpa passed away a number of years ago, it wasn't until he was like near death that we started to really explore, and I started to ask a lot more questions about his life. And like, if you have grandparents that are still alive, your grandparents' lives are fascinating. You know, like what they've lived through, even your parents. And something like that we oftentimes don't think about, there's a lot of emphasis right now on understanding your family of origin, right? Like where things came from. And if you didn't come from a family of Christian faith, like there could be some really interesting things to learn if you have a grandparent alive or an older parent, to just sit them down and ask questions about their life and story. But if you do have a family of faith, like I'm actually surprised by the number of people that don't know their family's faith story. Like where did it arrive from? And something I learned actually just this summer was my grandma's faith story. And I learned it through my dad, because my dad, for the first time, and my dad is 68 years old, for the first time he sat my grandma down, because she's getting older, she's in her late 80s, and he said, hey, I know that you raised us in a Christian family to know the Lord, but she had a really messy childhood, and he said, but I want to understand, like, how did you come to know Jesus?
Yeah.
And there's like a really powerful family faith story where she was in the foster care system, and a Christian family took her in. and they introduced her to Jesus. And she got baptized while she was living with them. And then because of these Christians that took her in, now like my dad grew up to know Jesus, and now we, you know, like you just see like I didn't even know that till this summer, you know, and I have a good relationship with my grandparents, and so I just feel like there is a deep well to draw from, and I mean, elderly folks just would love to share, you know, their life with you.
I think even everything you just said reminds me of the quote you opened with at the beginning. Like as you hear those stories, you hear and see God's faithfulness.
God's faithfulness.
You know? All right, I want to move through some of these because we do want to get to some of your questions. And so let's keep going. Next one is the lumberjack meal. I know I just skipped somebody in the round robin process. So let's keep going. Lumberjack meal, organize a meal with 2 to 3 friends, ask them to help you see blind spots, identify areas of growth, and remove the log.
This might be the most creative one, and it might also be the most intimidating one. Jim, the whole church knows that you came up with this because it's called the lumberjack meal. So, talk us through this.
Yeah, there's a concept called the Johari Window, and it's about, and it names like the different areas of our self-knowledge. There's the things that we know that we don't share with others. There's things that we don't know and others don't know. But there is this one pocket where other people know things about us that we don't know about ourselves. The way we come across, even maybe fears and insecurities that seem like they're evident to all except for you. And we need to be able to see ourselves through the eyes of some other people and to see what we can't see. And there are very few things in life that have been more of a gift than the faithful or the wounds of a friend. And when you kind of open that door, they will be able to name things that you can bring out into the light. And then there's just the gift of grace, of being able to sit before God and saying, I'm a flawed, sinful human being, even more than I understand. And yet you still love me. You call me your own. You've rescued me and redeemed me. And sitting in the place of being a recipient of grace is such a better place than trying to pretend like you're the person who never does anything wrong.
Absolutely.
This is something that the 3 of us have done together, actually. You know, we didn't call it a lumberjack meal at the time. But I would say personally, like you two have both done this, like the blind spots for me, and it has been the most helpful.
Totally.
And exactly what you're saying, Jim, is like friends that deeply love you, who can see some things in your life and just point them out to you, not out of being malicious or hostility or trying to put you down, but to say, hey, out of love for you, hey, here's something that we see, and there's actually grace in that, you know? And then you're saying, oh yeah, I actually see that, you know? And we've done this several times together.
Been incredibly helpful.
And I remember like where we were at, like because some of those conversations have been so formative for me. And it's like, oh yeah, I think you're naming something that I feel internally, but I've never named it. And you guys are giving language to it. And yeah, I see that. Like, and then you guys have said, hey, here, like, let's help you grow in this, you know? And it's been, even from back when I was a resident, you did this with me at the Indian buffet. And it was like, we almost died eating there, but you did this with me. And I remember, like, there's these certain moments in my life where I feel like God has used them in very transformational ways, and it's through doing this.
Yeah, man, I think it's an opportunity to unlock a lot of growth. Your walk with Jesus and just even your walk as a whole, you know, as a human being. So let me ask you this. With this one, just real quick. Is it best to go in with some predetermined questions? Like, should you give that to the people who are going to be speaking into your life? Do you just want them to kind of rattle off some things? Like, I guess my question is, do you go into this with a game plan?
I think one question that you can ask, and this could be the only question, is what do you see about my life that I might not see? And then ask the follow-up questions. And I think the more you can be curious about what they're saying and ask the follow-up questions there rather than come with your preloaded categories.
Sure. I see what you're saying.
It would be helpful.
It's good.
Yeah.
It's good.
All right.
I think these other two are pretty straightforward if we want to do the
You want to
questions.
rattle them off?
Yeah. It's calendar audit and setting aside time to review your calendar from the last month and then schedule time for key relationships over the next upcoming months. And I just think, it's reviewing your calendar and saying, hey, I want to make time for what's most important. And here's the relationships. The other one is sharing a meal or coffee with someone from the church that you've never spent time with and just simply getting to know them and listening to their story. And a lot of the same stuff we've already talked about applies on just asking some questions. Hey, I want to get to know you. You're a brother or sister in Christ and would love to connect with you.
Totally.
And then the last one was the forum that has already passed that we want to talk through questions from.
Absolutely. All right. Anything on the calendar audit, shared meal, anything you guys want to speak on further?
I think just the calendar.
Yeah.
There's something when it comes to like budgeting.
Yeah.
And I think Dave Ramsey says it, and he may have got it from somewhere else. But if you don't have a budget, you're not telling your money where it's going. Your money's going to tell you where it's going. And the same is with time, right? Discipleship 101 is you make time for what's important to you.
Yeah.
And if you don't use a calendar and prioritize things, the busyness and the tyranny of the urgent is going to dictate where your time is spent.
I'm almost willing to go, and you know what? If someone gets upset with me because of this, I can live with it. You should have a calendar.
Yeah.
You should have a calendar. Like, if you are an adult and you plan to take care of your life well, steward your time well, care for others well, you should keep a calendar.
Yeah.
This does not feel at all controversial.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I know we don't. This is not a legalistic thing. This is just like wisdom for living.
Yeah, it's wisdom.
Yeah.
This is wisdom for living. You got to keep a calendar. And I say that because I still encounter people who don't have one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It just
And
helps
then
you
they're
prioritize.
stressed, and they're like, it's like you got to keep a calendar. It's very, very important.
Look, if you are able to, if you don't have a calendar and you feel like I am always on time, I am spending time with all of my most important relationships and making time for them and have totally prioritized my life well, then keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
But if that's not you, then get a calendar as an act of love.
Yeah, and I think this to me is like step 2 of that, of like, because you can have a calendar, and I think even I fall into this, and you can still be very reactive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This is proactive to go, I don't just want to log the dates as they come to me. I want to make sure I'm making the time for the important things in my life. So
I don't think it's controversial.
I don't know.
The historic church came up with a church calendar because they said we want to structure our time different than the world for 2,000 years. So.
That's true. That's true. Hey, you guys know how it is, man. The thing that you don't think is controversial,
We should rename this podcast to like 3 old men.
3 old men.
We just get like
Redemption
rocking
rants.
chairs. Yeah.
All of life rant.
Yeah.
All right. Share a meal. That's a pretty straightforward one. Anything more before we start to get at some of these questions?
I think that's it. I think we should jump in.
All right. So, man, you guys responded so incredibly well during our All of Life forums, and you submitted a ton of questions. And as it always is with these events, we can never get to all the questions that we want to. Mm-hmm. And so what we promised is we would create a space here where we would answer some of those questions. So we're going to do that today.
We got to make sure we scroll the right questions after the marriage night on sex last night.
Yeah. So we use the same line for a number of our events, including our marriage night one. So
I think we should prioritize the ones on friendship and dating because there was a recent marriage night that was focused on sex that covered a lot of those. I mean, we can hit some of that if we want. But, I mean, let's see. One of the ones that pops up is how should you best discern if you should marry someone or not when you're dating them? And I think... Yeah, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, you gave the talk on the Contrarian's Guide to Dating.
Yeah.
And it would be cool maybe to speak a little bit more if you feel comfortable with, like, to that question.
Yeah. So, we talked about, like, in the talk, the shallow and the deep criteria. Shallow criteria being things like your hobbies, your interests, which can change, physical features, the spark, those sorts of things, which are all fine and good. They're a part of it, but they're shallow.
Right.
They shouldn't be determining much.
You said they're like sugar, didn't you?
They're like sugar.
They're like sugar.
They make a meal more enjoyable,
Yeah.
like sugar does. Makes a meal more enjoyable. But if you base your diet on how much sugar can you get and nothing else, then it's going to not be a nourishing, healthy meal. And so the deeper criteria being things like the person's character and are they growing? You can sometimes have very nice people who actually aren't growing in Christ.
Yeah. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Okay, so isn't there some degree of, even when you get married, like I think this happens today, but even when you get married, you're necessarily kind of still in the shallows?
Tell me more.
Well, I mean, like, there is a depth that comes with time that you're not going to have.
Like a deeper knowing.
Yeah, like you're still, if we're talking about an ocean, even as you propose, you're still just seeing the seashells.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, honestly, that is why this is maybe another contrarian thing.
Sure.
I think people think way too much about who they should marry and way too little once they get married on how they can know each other deeper and cultivate the type of character.
Yeah.
Bang.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a good
Frankly,
word.
here's what I think. Look, if you have a similar trajectory, this person's growing in the fruit of the Spirit, they're following Jesus, and you have there's enough of a personality compatibility that you can have a friendship with this person for a long period. Just get married to him and then cultivate a marriage.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The way that I always say it in premarital and talking through with people is essentially the same thing. I just say that's the beauty of a covenant. I think God's design for marriage is that you find someone that meets the essentials as far as character and godliness and those things, someone you can cultivate a deep friendship with. Then you commit to them, and now you are in a covenant relationship, which creates an environment of security where you figure the rest of life out.
Absolutely.
Meaning, like, come what may, through the good and bad, we're going to fail, we're going to go through hard things. You get to build a life with someone. And I think that's just the reality of, like, you want to commit to someone and then build a life, deeper knowing, cultivating that. Yeah. And I always say, like, to that question, how do you know? I would say there are the criteria that Jim just shared, which I 110% agree with. But if you're curious, I would just say, if they meet that criteria of someone that's following Jesus, Christian, all of those things, do you enjoy being with that person?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Like, if you're wondering, should I marry him? Do you enjoy being with them? Like, are they following Jesus like you? Do they have character and godliness and someone that you have a friendship with and a similar trajectory? Well, if you don't enjoy being with them, don't marry them.
Don't marry them.
It's a pretty easy criteria. Do you want to spend time with them? Do you? Because you're going to be with them the rest of your life.
I just think people really want the depth of 20 years on day one.
Yeah.
But they don't understand, to get to the depth of 20 years, to all of what you've named, you got to go through day 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth, cultivating them.
Yeah. And the hard thing is they act like they want the depth of 20 years, but they don't actually want the depth of 20 years because you have to go through suffering.
Right.
Like, every one of us, even you've been married for what?
7 years.
7 years. Yeah. Mariah and I, 15.
Almost 20.
Almost 20. All of us have gone through really hard things, right? From sicknesses and deaths to financial crises to miscarriages and child loss. I mean, just
sorts of
really hard things. And it is through the fire that your marriage is refined. And that's where the depth comes, and that's why a covenant is needed, right? It's for better or worse.
So,
and I would say one other criteria with it is the friends and family who know you best, what do they say?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're thinking it's a good idea and all these other things,
kind of the communal discernment of, like,
Jim,
that's
give us another one.
Another one was there were a lot that were in that regard.
We got a lot of questions this
There
night.
were a lot.
There was a lot.
There were a lot.
How do you find balance between trying to be a friend to everyone while also choosing depth over quality? So I think it's the idea of how do you balance out having a breadth of relationships versus the depth of relationships?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Daniel was talking about it. No, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll jump in.
I think one thing is recognizing your limitations.
Mm-hmm.
Like you most likely, I think it was even named during the night, the number of people that you can actually cultivate a depth of relationship with. And I think this can happen when you move beyond just people pleasing and really try to love people, because then you go, well, if I'm just trying to please people, I can sprinkle myself a million different places.
Mm-hmm.
But if I actually want to love someone well, there are probably a couple people I need to commit to and them to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would say, Jesus has his 3,
Right.
his 12,
Yeah.
with one Judas in it.
Once
And then the crowds, which were probably about a 150,
All of you have one Judas. We've all been betrayed.
Yeah. I think you can have like 3 or 3 to 5, like really close, like share everything,
Yeah.
foxhole sort of friends.
Mm-hmm.
About 12 like legitimate friendships. And then, 100 or so acquaintances.
Right.
Yeah.
Where the brief moments you have are like encouraging and beneficial to one another, but you don't have to like constantly be that intentional about those.
Right.
Yep.
But I also think though that there's some importance to thinking about your friendships as not trying to put a roster of the like, how do I put this? Almost creating a resume of friendships with the most impressive people that you can find.
Yeah.
You need friendships of those who are going through suffering and hard things, and you don't bail on them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they're no longer like adding value. You need to, build friendships with the elderly who are forgotten, people with, neurodivergent and different disabilities, people from different backgrounds that you don't necessarily know about. So if you're just like a wealthy person with a bunch of wealthy friends, you are missing out.
You're missing out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you just go, going back to the calendar. Like, if you have a breadth of friends, the quantity is a lot, many.
Right.
The quality and depth is just not, you're not able to have it. And I think that everything Jim said, I like the language Justin Whitmell Early in his book on friendship made for people. He uses the language covenant friendship.
Yeah.
And I really like the way that he defines it, but it's essentially what you're saying, Jim, is, you have your 3 to 5. These are covenant friends, like you're doing life with them.
Yeah.
They might be godparents. They might be in the will for your kids, but you're sharing just the deepest of life. But then you have your broader, just like, hey, I got a dozen like friends, where it's like, hey, these are friends. But then you've got the acquaintances and kind of this, larger circle. But you just can't have that depth with that many people. We don't have the capacity or time to do that, you know?
Even as you guys said, I just want to say one more thing. I think it's important that you guys say that and that we hear that, because I think somewhere along the line, maybe we felt a pressure of inauthenticity when we can't be deep with everyone.
Yeah.
And so you're saying like there are necessarily going to be friendships where you're not going to be as deep with people, and that's okay.
Yeah. And a lot of things are like affinity-based relationships. They probably won't. I don't want to say never, but they're based off of just an interest.
Yeah.
And you could have a covenant friend that you also have the same interest with, but I think a lot of those kind of acquaintances are around affinity. Like hey, we go and watch basketball together, and we might have a good conversation, but we're not like in the depths of each other's lives, doing the lumberjack meal, sharing finances, those kind of things.
Yeah.
And I just think we have, there is a limit.
The only thing I get a little worried about is that we are also called to be people of hospitality and welcome.
Right.
And that there are people who are lonely, who need community, and often can't find it because that 3 to 5 locks off.
Okay, I gotcha.
And so I think that there's both a tension. There's a tension of saying we need to cultivate this depth of friendship, but there's also like needs to be a space at your table for welcoming other people.
Leave some chairs open.
Yeah. That was our thing when Jenny and I realized we only had, we were going to have one kid because of health reasons. And we got this table with like 6 chairs. Our prayer was that God would fill those with people who need a sense of family. And having a posture of like unofficial adoption.
I actually think that could be another category that we're not talking about is the we're talking about friendship, but who are the people that maybe we actually adopt as family? And they kind of become, you're not biological family, but adopted. And I think you guys have done a really good job with that, and have really embodied that. But I would almost even say, at least the way that I think personally, is the covenant friends are outside of my family, but like your family's your family, And so I think that there's even a category of that where you could say, hey, we actually don't just want to invite someone to be an acquaintance, but we actually want to say, hey, who are folks that we could actually invite into our lives, maybe even into our home, to be family, And I think that the church is a family, and it's a great like metaphor for that.
Absolutely. Do you have another one, Jim? I see some threads here. I can kind of
what pops up?
There's one that a couple of people asked around friendship with unbelievers. It feels like, how do you do that faithfully?
Yeah, it's an interesting.
Every situation's way different too.
Totally.
You can't just give like a blanket answer for this, but maybe we can even just give some like wisdom.
Yeah. I think, can you have a real meaningful relationship with people who don't know Jesus? Yeah. I think it's part of common grace.
Right.
That they're made in the image of God, and therefore care about things that are important things in God's world. And when you've gone through life together and suffered together and have experiences and inside jokes and these sorts of things, it can be very meaningful relationships. I think that there's a certain part of your life that may not have the same depth because they can't relate to the most important part of your life. But I even think that there can be a degree of depth there in naming that difference and the expression of the longing for them to know, Jesus.
I think that's a really good point of like, hey, we're friends, but there is something very different about us. Like the totality of the way that we see reality is different. Because Jesus has reoriented all of life. I think there's a lot of, obviously there's like what you said, Warren, every situation is different, so I don't want to give a blanket answer. But, I think there is wisdom, though, especially if you're newer in your faith. You probably should be surrounded by a bunch of Christians who can nurture, disciple, pour into you. Because we all know, like we all were once brand new Christians, and we're all prone to wander, regardless of if you walked with Jesus for 50 years. But when you are fresh into becoming a new creation in Christ, the propensity to go back to the old way of life is so still present, and it's so close that you need some people to continue to point you to Jesus. And that doesn't mean sever all relationships with every non-Christian. Like, Jesus has left us in the world for a reason, right? So we can be salt and light. You preached on that a few weeks ago. But I think that there's wisdom of then getting to a place where you're a little bit more stable in your faith in Jesus, where you're more confident in who God has now redeemed you to be, where you're able to be and equipped to be a faithful friend to non-Christians.
Man, John, I'm so glad you said that, because like confession time, that's what I did when I became a believer. And it was hard because I had one friendship in particular that I felt really close with this guy. But now, like, God's doing this new work on me. He's changed my heart. And it felt really hard at the time. to try and hold that friendship with this new thing that God was doing very clearly in my life. And so I probably didn't handle it well. To be honest, I just kind of cut it off, and I was like, hey man, like we can't hang out, we can't go to the clubs, I need to kind of separate and sever myself from that. But the more I look back on that, I think what you've named is what was happening. Like I needed to be surrounded by the body. I needed to be helped along in this new thing that God was doing in my life. And at the time, I just couldn't hold space for that friendship that would be pulling me back.
Yeah.
So
and then a lot of times when you come to faith,
it's not ideal, but
and you change, your friends are like, they give you the boot anyways, right? They're like, oh, you're different, you're not cool anymore, you don't do the whole thing. But then I do think the reality, though, for us, like if you have good Christian community around you and you've got some Christian friends, I absolutely think that we should have deep, meaningful relationships with people that don't know Jesus.
Yeah,
and I think
absolutely.
it's the best way to do evangelism is through relationships. And like what you said, Jim, but to be honest about like, hey, there's a big difference between us.
Yeah.
But I have found in my life some of the best conversations have come out of that.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. They're not fake relationships for the sake of evangelism.
Right.
Yeah. They're actually real, meaningful, like care for the person. If you knew that they were never going to become a believer, you would still be friends with them, that sort of thing.
You love them without an agenda.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. One more.
Okay.
One more, and then we'll wrap. And maybe in a later episode, we'll get to some of these, or we'll probably just get to them along the course of you attending our church. So, what do you got, Jim?
Someone asked, like, what is lust? And how do you avoid it?
Yeah.
And here's why I like that question. When I first became a believer, I was like 16, 17 years old. And I started going to a church. And I got into this small group.
Sure.
And the small group would go around every week and talk about how often they were struggling with lust. And you would go from person to person to person, and they would name like how many times. First guy would be like, I struggled 5 times. The other person would be like, I struggled 4. And the whole room, it was like multiple times. And I was new to the faith and didn't know what they were talking about. I had never heard any teenage person use the word lust. I thought it was like a middle-aged, romance novel word.
Man.
And I thought all these guys were just sleeping with people every time that they said lust. And this guy over here, he said 6 times. And I'm thinking, even when I was trying my hardest to like sleep around, I wasn't doing it like this guy here.
Yeah, my
and I'm looking around the room. I'm like, really, these guys?
Man.
Like, And I was so confused because of like inside Christian lingo that I didn't know what they were talking about, and they weren't coming out and saying it. And really what they were saying is they were looking at pornography and, masturbating, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But they weren't having a candid conversation about it,
Right.
And then, but I think that there is something to that where there's these words that you go around.
Yeah.
And you just like assume everyone knows, but
in broader society, it's not being used.
You gave the sermon on this.
Yeah.
Like, speak to it.
Yeah. If I were to try to give a definition, I probably roundabout did something like this in the sermon, is lust is not just a normal attraction where you notice beauty in someone. That's not lust. That's just a part of saying, man, God created beautiful things and beautiful people, and there's a way in which you can actually give thanks to God for that. Lust, though, is where you are desiring someone who is not your spouse.
Yeah.
And it specifically includes sexual fantasizing about the person, which is why I talked about honoring and valuing instead of using someone as an object. What lust does is it turns someone into an object where you then are sexualizing them, and it usually involves a vivid imagination.
Right.
And so that's what lust is. I would say it's deep-seated. It's where you sexualize another human being and you fantasize about them with your imagination.
Yeah.
And what Jesus is forbidding specifically in the Sermon on the Mount is against sexual fantasizing with someone who is not your spouse.
Yeah.
So that oftentimes within Christian marriages, people are like, well, can I lust after my spouse? Well, no, technically, but you could still treat your spouse like an object in other ways.
Yeah.
But as far as can you lust after your spouse? No, you should be sexually attracted to your spouse. And it's okay to even have fantasies about what you want to do with your spouse because you're in a covenant marriage the way that God created sex to be lived out.
Yeah. And I think something that's really important with this is that people often speak about like sexual expression as a need.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a need.
It's not a need.
It's a want. And it's a want that can be expressed in marriage. But like, you're not going to die
Yeah.
if you're not,
Totally.
We
agree.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. I think we would, to get into the topic of lust, we probably need another hour.
Yeah.
Right? To get into all of it.
Yeah.
But does it only pertain to like sexuality?
I think in the like broader linguistic language, people can use it
Towards other things.
Towards
I mean,
other
you hear
things,
that.
yeah.
Like, I'm lusting after,
Yeah.
But
I don't know,
I think
something else.
Yeah, I think what people are
Food,
saying is like the meaning is more like coveting,
Yeah.
strongly
That's good.
desiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think this does just kind of limit itself to sexual.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things on how to fight this has to do with changing the way that you view the other person. And if you can view every person who is not your spouse as a brother or sister, then that's really what does the trick.
Right.
Brothers and sisters, unless there's some really truly distorted thing that goes on, they can acknowledge that the other one would be attractive and see why someone might want to like date him. But the mere thought of any of that is disgusting, is gross, because you hold them in esteem with a different type of identity. And I think that's the most important thing is to, because you can still objectify someone in the way that you're trying to resist lust.
Yeah.
Of saying, of like acting as if they're just a sexual object, therefore you need to avoid them at all costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's important to name.
Yeah. And the only other thing that I would say with this is how to fight it is actually to believe that you can fight it.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times in the church, we have this defeatist mentality of like, there's no way I can ever fight this. Yeah. And if you are a Christian, you have the Spirit of God in you. And the most important thing, step one, is actually pray like your life depends on it. Like the power is in the Spirit. And there's some practical things depending on what the lust situation is. But like, don't believe that you can't fight it.
Yeah.
Like, you can actually overcome it. And what Jim said is a really powerful thing, even to turn into a prayer, is God, give me eyes to see this woman or this man the way that you see them.
Amen.
Amen. Because you actually view them as a brother or sister with dignity and value instead of an object to be used.
I can close this part because I think we'll need to have a longer conversation about this. We'll probably get to it. But I have a little quippy Christian saying that I can give you to put this, to bring this home. I heard it once said, don't hang any pictures in your imagination that you wouldn't hang in your home.
Ooh, that's good.
There you go.
I don't remember who said it, so
I
will claim.
Yeah.
That's good.
Someone else said it. But anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed the conversation today. We covered a lot, and we're going to continue to try to bring these to you guys as at least twice a month, but maybe even more. And I would encourage you to do, if you want to continue the conversation we're having today, share this with a friend. You guys can listen to it, interact with it, grab the King of Kings guide, and actually pick some of the actions there that you want to engage with. And then just, we'll have more events and things coming up for the conversation to continue in a million different ways. And so join us. And so, guys, we thank you. Thanks for jumping in today, and we will see you next time here on the All of Life podcast. Later.